Well, good morning and welcome to Sunday School for, honestly, y'all, I don't know what day it is anymore, but welcome to Sunday School, welcome to small group. We are going to study the Word today. But as we get started, I want to ask you if you remember something from your childhood. Now, this is a dodgeball, but I don't know if you remember ever playing kickball on the playground or maybe baseball or softball, in the backyard. And you all line up, two guys or two girls get picked as captains, and they stand up and they start to pick the first person to be on their team and the second person to be on their team, and it goes on and on and on. And finally, there's that one little skinny kid at the end left, and finally somebody says, "Okay, I'll take him." That little scrawny, skinny kid might look something like me, not really sure, but sometimes when those things happen, somebody feels like they are the man. I was picked first, I'm the best, and you got the scrawny kid at the end, like maybe feeling kind of bad that he didn't get picked, but pretty happy he probably just gets to sit in the outfield and not do anything. But somebody feels in, and somebody feels like they're on the outs. Well, today in our passage, we're going to be in Romans chapter 11. And Paul is going to talk to us about some people who might feel like they are the stuff, they're the in crowd, and they look down on, they're too prideful for this other crowd. And that's where Paul is going to be headed today. And what he's going to land on, though, is that those folks who think they're on the inside with God, really do not need to be looking down on those who they think are on the outs with God. Because what made them in is not their talent, it's not how great they were. What made them be on the ends with God is because God called them out and said, "You come." It's not because of what you did, it's because of what I'm doing for you. And that's what we're going to study today in Romans chapter 11. Now, we're going to begin in the middle of a section, so I don't want you to be unaware of what's happened right before this. In the beginning of this chapter, Romans chapter 11, Paul is talking about his Jewish kinfolks, and he's going to talk about what they've done since Christ has come, how many of them are unbelieving, and he's going to call them forth to be believers of Christ. But then in verse 13, he says this, he says, "Now I am speaking to you, Gentile." In other words, you non-Jewish believer, check up, look up, pay attention, this is for you. And about probably 99% of you who are watching this, I would say if not more, are going to be that non-Jewish believer that he's talking to. So y'all, let's check up and let's listen. Our situation is going to be different. He's talking to a different culture, a different group of people, but what he's saying still can apply to us today. So I want us to pick up in verse 17 of chapter 11, and we're going to read through verse 21. And while I do it, Paul's going to use an analogy about an olive tree. And I want you to kind of pick up the different parts of that analogy, different parts of the picture he's going to paint, and think about what group of people is represented by each of the pictures. So if you'll look with me at Romans chapter 11, picking up verse 17, reading down through verse 21. "But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, 'Branches were broken off, so that I might be grafted in.' That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief. But you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you." Now, y'all, I'm not a horticulturalist. I don't know anything about growing olive trees. But what Paul's talking about here is a practice that was common in his day. The olive grower would go out to a tree that he had cultivated and grown, and he would cut off a limb or a branch or a shoot off the side of it. He would take it over to a wild olive tree, and he would graft that branch on from the cultivated tree to the wild tree. And then it would grow olives on the wild tree. Now he did this because the wild trees were actually stronger than the cultivated trees, and there was a whole process for that. But Paul just wants to take that picture and he turns it just a little bit so we can see what it means to be grafted into God's family. He says that you, Gentile, you are the wild tree, or the wild branch. I've cut you off of that and grafted you onto the cultivated tree. So the wild branch being put on the cultivated tree, the Gentile coming into the family of God, and then on that tree are the cultivated branches. They're the Jews. They're the Jews who believed in Christ, who are part of God's family. Now, some of those branches have been cut off. And those branches that were cut off are those who are the Jews who cut themselves off through disbelief in Christ. And so these Gentiles are coming over into God's family, and that's a very old family tree. It goes all the way back to Abraham, when God called Abraham out and said, I'm going to start a nation with you. I'm going to start a Hebrew people. They're going to come out of your family, Abraham. And then many years later, many people believed on the truth that out of that family, the Messiah would come. They believed that and had faith that God was going to send a Messiah out of that Israel nation. And along the way, God moved history along till just the right time. Christ came. The Messiah came and lived a sinless life, died in our place, died, rose again, ascended to heaven. And you know what? A lot of Jews in that day believed, but many, many more did not believe. And God then sent out people like Paul into the Gentile nations, the non-Jewish nations, and began to share that gospel message. And many of those Gentiles believed. And God said, you are now being adopted in, grafted in to this family tree that I've had going for a long time. You're now part of God's family. But he says, hold up. Don't get on your high horse. You're not special. It's not because of something you did. I'm the one that brought you over. I grafted you in through the work of Christ. And all you did was have faith. You're not special. You don't look down on, don't think you're better than those Jews who don't believe. You're not special. It's because of what I did. And so I want us to bring this into our day. Don't sometimes we get a little proud about our salvation? Man, God picked me. I'm the best. He called me out first. And we start to look around at those around us, so maybe those unbelievers around us, and go, you know, if they would just live life like me, man, they'd be a whole lot better off. They'd just ruin their life. Man, I pity them. I'm so much better than them. Maybe we need to think about that for a second. I want you to stop and discuss with your group there. Why is it important for us not to get proud, not to get on our high horse about the fact that Christ saved us? What would that do to our relationships? What would that do to us sharing the gospel? What does that mean for us to not get proud about our salvation? As we come out of that discussion, I want to challenge you to preach the gospel this week, but preach it to yourself. Because that gospel message reminds us, it can remind us daily, that it is by God's grace that we are saved. Not because of something we did, because of what He did and who He is. And if we're reminded of that, it's going to remind us that those who have not come to faith in Christ yet still need to hear that message, and they need to be saved by grace. They don't need to get their life together first. They need to come to faith in Christ first, and then He will get their life straight. So I challenge you this week on that. But let's keep going. I want you to think about something else. I want you to think about a picture of a scale. So you've got a scale, and on one side you've got a little plate there, and on the other side you've got another plate, and you put something in this plate here, and all of a sudden it does that. And trying to figure out how heavy this is, you don't really know, is it 1 kilogram, 2 kilograms? So then you begin putting weights on this side. And it's going to kind of go down a little more the more weights you put on it until you have an even number of weights. If you have 2 kilograms on this side, you know this thing weighs 2 kilograms. So they're balanced out at that point. So I want you to keep that picture in your mind as we read verses 22 through 24, all right? Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity toward those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in His kindness. Otherwise, you will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will the natural branches, be grafted back in to their own olive tree? Now I want you to picture that scale again. And I want you to picture on one side God's kindness. And on the other side God's severity is the word used here. And so think about that. Is God's kindness super heavy and severity super light? Or is God really mean and he's not kind at all? So his heaviness is over here with his severity. The truth is that God's severity and God's kindness are balanced out. They balance each other out. God is not so kind that he will overlook evil, nor is God so severe that he condemns without cause. Just think of those Jews who are no longer part of God's family. Think about them he talks about here. God says, if they'll believe, I'll graft them right back in. If God can graft in me, the Gentile from over here, from a wild tree, if he can graft me in the family, those Jews who've cut themselves off through unbelief, if they'll just believe, he'll graft them right back in. That's what he's saying. God's kindness is never too much or too little for someone else. So no one is too bad to receive God's kindness. And so I want you to discuss this. How can we show the kindness of God to those around us? God's kindness here relates to his forgiveness and to his salvation. So how can we share God's kindness with those around us this week? Well, we can do it in several ways, but whatever way you show kindness, it needs to be gospel-centered. I can go out and I can help somebody pump their gas. I can go out and I can deliver food to somebody. I can help somebody change their tire. Well, no, I can call somebody else to help somebody change their tire, but I can be kind. But the way we show God's kindness is we do it through a gospel-centeredness. In other words, do I have to share the full gospel every time I talk to somebody? No. But we need to do it with the gospel in mind and headed towards sharing the gospel. We can have what we call gospel conversations where we talk about what the Lord's doing in our life, but we talk to them about maybe what God's doing in their life. And so we need to focus on the gospel when we do ministry and when we do service, because that's what's important. And so let's finish up though by looking at verses 25 through 32. Lest ye be wise in your own sight, I do not want you to be unaware of this mystery, brothers. A partial hardening has come upon Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And this is the way all Israel will be saved, as it is written, the deliverer comes from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. As regards the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But as regards election, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers. For the gifts and the callings of God are irrevocable. For just as you were at one time disobedient to God, but now have received mercy because of their disobedience, so too they have been disobedient, in order that by mercy shown to you, they also may receive mercy. For God has consigned all to disobedience, that he may have mercy for all. Now, y'all, there is a lot going on in those verses. And there are a lot of interpretations about what's being said in those verses. But I don't want us to get caught up in that. I want us to stay focused on what we're talking about. We're talking about the Gentile, being, or rather not being proud because of what God's done for us, because of our salvation. Look at verse 25 through 27. Yes, Paul says to those in his culture, some Jews did not believe, and that's opened the door for you. Verse 28 through 29. Yes, regarding the gospel, many of them are enemies to God, but he loves them because he chose out their forefathers and he had a plan for them. And that plan is not irrevocable. That word means he doesn't regret it. Verse 30 through 32. You disobey God so that you can receive his mercies. They've disobeyed God so they can receive his mercies. The point is, don't get on your high horse about who you are thinking you're better than somebody else because God's forgiven you. The point is that God has chosen us, not that we chose him. And so I want you to challenge you this week to think about sharing the gospel. The fact that it was a gift to you, you can now gift it to someone else. You can now take that gospel message out into your community. It's hard to go out in the community right now, but many of us are serving. Many of you are calling people, talking to people in ways you've never done before. I want to challenge you to share the gospel with people. And maybe you've spent some time this past week or whatever looking down on folks because they just are not doing it the way you do it. Because God chose you and you're just better than them. And you may not think it exactly like that, but I want you to think about times when maybe you kind of felt like that. And talk to God about that this week. And just want to challenge you to remember that He chose us, He died for us, He called us, and He is changing us, and He will one day save us in the end. It's not about us, it's all about Him. Thank you. Hope to see you soon.